On April 10th, Google launched version 1 of this new library called MCP Toolbox for Database. They were working on this project for a year at least, and it just reached version 1. I want to share what this library is all about, or tool is all about, and what I think about it. So this is basically MCP Toolbox for databases. So we have seen many database related MCP servers out there, but this one is a little bit different because it allows you to connect to multiple databases. It's just not restricted to one or two databases. It allows you to connect you to multiple databases. And if you don't know what MCP means, MCP is basically a standardized way for tool calling. So we'll have something called MCP client, and this will connect to something called MCP server. And this MCP server is the one that gives the ability to access the tools. For example, if the MCP server is created to access your SQL Server database or Postgres database, then MCP client will be able to connect to the server and understand the capabilities offered by that server, and then it can use that. So the MCP client will normally live within your agent. Like, you'll have agent as part of your IDE extension like Copilot, or you might have, your TUI based agents like Claude Code or Copilot CI, Copilot CLI. Those are basically your MCP client. You'll be able to install and activate MCP client as part of those agents, and then those will be able to connect to this MCP server to understand what capabilities are offered by this MCP server. Then that information can be sent to the LLM. So LLM can use those tools. So basically MCP server is like a place where you define all the tools available for the LLMs to use, and LLM will be able to decide what tool it wants to use and send that information back to MCP client, and an MCP client will send that to MCP server to run that particular tool. So if we take an example of running a query, we might have MCP server to connect to Postgres database, and it might offer a tool to execute a query. So now the MCP client will share that information to your LLM, and LLM knows that now it has ability to run SQL query. So as part of its problem solving, it might be able to create a query and send that query to MCP client and ask MCP client to run it on MCP server. It will run it, get the result back, and that result will be sent back to LLM for whatever it needs to do as a next step. So that is the kind of ability we'll be getting with MCP server and client. And when this was introduced by Anthropic coined this as a USB-C moment for agents or agentic AI, because rather than agents understanding how to talk to many different tools that might come up in the future, it just needs to know one thing. It just needs to know how to connect to MCP server or how to talk the language of model context protocol. That's it. Then every tool providers, for example, SQL Server, Postgres, or Slack, uh, whatever that is, they just need to define their own MCP server following the standard protocol. Then immediately all your agent will be able to access those tools using this standardized model context protocol. So that is the gist of it. Okay, so this particular project is basically a specialized model context protocol that allows you to connect to multiple databases. Okay, and one of the beauty of this particular framework or library is that it can be used as a ready-to-use MCP server in your TUI based or CLI based agents like Gemini CLI, Claude Code, and all. And you can also use it as a framework when you're building your own custom um, agent. So you might be creating a custom agent using LangChain or anything like that. And you can use this as a framework within that as well. So this can be used as a standalone MCP server, as well as you can use it as a framework within the agent that you build. So that is something that I really like about this, because it gives you the two different ways to use it. And they're just saying that previously they used to call this as a Gen AI toolbox. Now they renamed this to MCP toolbox because that is the crux of it, right? It is fundamentally an MCP server. So Then they are explaining why this is useful. So, like I said, out of the box, it provides access to many of the standard data access tools, like listing tables, executing SQL, and all those things. And it is also a custom tools framework, right? You'll be able to create your own framework using this, and it gives you a lot of advantages. For example, one of the things that stands out is that it allows you to do restricted access. So they do all these things using config actually. So you can use their pre-built config, or you can create your own config that defines exactly what is allowed and what is not allowed. So if you have a database and that database has some off limits table, then you'll be able to create your custom config to define exactly what is allowed. So that is what they refer to as restricted access here. This I find very powerful, because if you use normal standard MCP servers available for database, this is what you will lack in them, because those MCP servers will have access to all of your tables. It won't have any guardrails or restrictions. It might be able to do anything and everything, which is probably not a good idea. But with this, we will be able to explicitly define what is allowed and what is not allowed, which I found really useful. And it gives you simplified development, because you can use it as a framework as well. You can easily integrate this into your agent development kit or other, agentic development toolkits like LangChain and other things. And they're saying that this is going to have better performance because it uses connection pooling out of the box, which is really important, right? So if you are having multiple agents or multiple tools using this tool, then if you don't use connection pooling, then you might end up with connection exhaustion, and which will bring down the usability of this tool altogether. So because they use connection pooling out of the box, which shows that they have thought about this deeply, that this is going to be used by multiple agents in parallel, and they want to give the best performance possible. And it also has integrated authentication, which is really good, because now one of the problem with the connecting to these kind of databases via MCP is authentication. We don't want to give too much permission. We don't want to give too little permission as well. So having this integrated authentication allows us to define what credentials that we want to use to allow these MCP servers to access our database, which is really good. And another thing is end-to-end observability. So they're going to give you full traceability of what has happened using OpenTelemetry, which is really good in a production like environment, because you want to know what is going on. If something goes wrong, you should be able to explain it clearly what went wrong and how do we fix it. So for that, this end-to-end observability is really important, and I'm happy that they have done that in this version that they have launched. And architecture-wise, this is really interesting. So MCP itself is a client server architecture. They are pushing this one level further. They are making this toolbox as well as a client server architecture. So when you have MCP server in a standard sense, that MCP server is basically a client for your MCP toolbox here. Okay, so if you take an example here, they are actually giving two different examples. One is used by um, computers. So this is an example where we are using tools like IDE extension or Gemini CLI or Cloud Code and things like that. So this has MCP server client, and this connects to this MCP toolbox. So this MCP toolbox itself is using client server architecture. So with this MCP toolbox being a server, what they can do is they'll be able to connect it to multiple different databases. As you can see here, they have actually shown here that this MCP toolbox will be able to talk to many different databases. So that is one advantage that I see, because this is a separate deployable unit which is outside of your CLI tools or agent-based applications that are developed using Google ADK or LangChain or LangGraph and stuff like that. Because this is going to sit outside of them, you will be able to change them, update them, upgrade them without bringing down any of these. So because this is an independent deployable unit, it is possible. Um, So I'm not going to go into the details of how this works, but I just want to give you a quick peek if you want to run it as an MCP server. All of these are in the documentation. The documentation is really good. So if you want to run it as an MCP server, you just need to define this in your MCP server configuration file. This is using npx from node or npm. And here you are actually saying that this is the toolbox that I want to use and this is the pre-built database. What it actually means is that we are here actually saying that this MCP server or this instance is for Postgres. It knows how to interact with Postgres. And there are different ways to use this. If you want to run it as a standalone tool, you can still do that using this. See here, actually, we need to pass this configuration file. This is really important because this is where you will be able to define all your configuration. Like, if you want to have some restricted access, you'll be able to do that. But what they are also saying is that you don't have to use custom configuration. The predefined or pre-built configuration comes with the sensible defaults. But if you want to have any domain specific restriction or your organization or team specific restriction, you will be able to create this custom configuration really easy. And this npm based thing is not designed for performance. This is designed for convenience. That's what they're saying. So it may not be suitable for highly performant uh, workload requirements. So for those things, they are offering a binary alternative that you can install for your platform. So this is supposed to be more performant than the npx based uh, runtime. And once you have installed, this is how you'll run it. You'll just call it toolbox, which is going to be your executable, and you run it using the config file that you have created. And they have a UI as well for this. I have not explored it, to be honest, but this UI is really useful for uh, you know to understand and go deep into the to go deep into the tool in the exploratory mode, because it has something called because it allows you to work with this tool interactively. Okay, so that is what this one does. And if you are a Mac user using Homebrew, they show how to do it, but it's all the same concept. And the second in, and the second important part is, instead of using it as a MCP server, you can use it as a framework within your agentic application that you're developing. So they are showing that it has support for many different libraries and programming languages. Like I previously said, the MCP Toolbox itself is a client server architecture. So you first need to create the client, use the toolbox, and then once you have done that, you'll be able to load the toolset name that you want, and then it will give you a list of tools that you can use. Like I said, it supports many different languages. Like, we have seen Python, we have support for JavaScript, TypeScript, and within them we have different libraries, right? It has examples for the client or SDK for all of them, and it has good support for Go. So if you want to Go, you can do that, or LangChain Go. There are many different agentic library available within Go. It supports most of them. Um, so one thing that I wanted to show, which is really interesting for me, is that if I go to the documentation here, and if I go to configuration, you can see here that it allows you to create a lot of custom configuration. So you can specify source. Source is basically what type of access you are creating. So in this case, we are creating Postgres access to this server with this port number and with this credentials. So you can create multiple sources talking to same database or different databases. So source is basically this logical concept that allows you to define, okay, so this is my source and this is my credentials. Um, and tool is basically the individual tools that are available within that source. So like I said previously, you can just use the pre-built configuration, or you can use your custom configuration. So in this case, they have chosen to use custom configuration. They have created a tool which is to search hotels by name. Okay, so this is domain specific, as you can see. And if you see here, they are using secure way to construct the query. So they are using something called parameterized query or prepared statement. So this avoids any type of SQL injection. So they really thought about the security side of this. And tool set is basically grouping one or more tools. So this is what we saw in the client library example where we are loading the tool set. When we load the tool sets, all the tools that are part of that tool set will be available for your client. So another interesting thing that I have noticed is prompts. So you can create your custom prompts. Once you have created these custom prompts, you'll be able to use them in your uh, agent tools using slash command. For example, if you're using Gemini CLI or Claude Code, you'll be able to use these prompts with the slash command, which is really interesting. One of the other thing that piqued my interest on this repository is the pre and post processing hooks available. So this is really important because there are many use cases for this. Uh, One of the things that stands out for me is security and access restriction. So because LLM is going to do a lot of things and we may not have direct control in terms of what query it asks your MCP server to run, the pre-processing and post-processing stage that you can hook into acts as a place where you can define all your rules. For example, if LLM says run this command on this particular table, and you don't want that table to be accessed by your LLM, you can clearly define your pre-processing step. And in the post-processing step, you can actually decide whether that output should be shared with your LLM or not, or if you want to do any obfuscation, masking, you can do all those things. So this one seems like a really interesting thing for me. Coupled this with your custom configuration. So with your custom configuration, you'll be able to exactly tell what tools are available, and through that, you'll be able to say what tables are available, what tables are not available. In addition to that, if you have this pre-processing and post-processing hook, this is going to make your security prospect much better. So I know this is still evolving and we don't have 100% secure environment when it comes to agentic AI, but this one is on a positive um, side. We are actually improving the security posture and we are providing better ways to tame the security problems that we see with these agent-based AI technologies. Okay, so that is all I wanted to share. This is actually really good initiative, really good project. I would at least try this in a non-prod environment. I'm not still ready to use these kind of tools in a prod-like environment, but on a lower environment, we can still use once people have audited this code and they have stamped that this is a secure code. It doesn't do anything dodgy, then you might consider rolling this into prod setup or prod workload. But for now, at least in a lower environment, this is a really useful tool, especially if you are dealing with multiple databases and if you want to create that cross-intelligent solution or capability within your coding agents. This is going to be really good. Okay, so that is all I wanted to share in this video. I hope this is useful. Thank you.